In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Sam Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. The purpose of education is to replace an empty mind with an open one. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: reimagining education for the modern age, the role of mental health in academic success, and building resilience in young minds. Our guest today is Clement, a seasoned educator and the visionary founder of Chi Education. Nicholas has dedicated his career to empowering children and teenagers by integrating mental health, mindfulness, and innovative learning strategies. His work not only redefined the classrooms, but also inspires a broader discussion about what it means to truly nurture the potential of our youth. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share. Your support helps more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Mr. Nicholas Clement, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am doing absolutely fantastic. I've been following your work a little bit, and what you're doing is definitely worth performing. So it's an absolute honor for us to be able to have you on with us today. And to start us off, I'd like for you to formally introduce and tell us more about Chi Education, please.
Okay, so I'm a primary school teacher. I've been teaching for over a decade. I left the profession in 2022, created the company Confident Healthy Individuals. So the aim is to, as it says in the title, create confident, healthy individuals through a variety of different ways. So we have cross-curricular wellbeing projects in schools, a mental health first aid course for teenagers, which is going to be a digital course soon, going across the world. Holiday clubs for children, which are in outdoor locations, and our mindfulness series books that I have co-authored as well.
Beautiful. When you're thinking about that gift of yours of educating, where does that come from?
I think I always wanted to be involved with coaching children of some kind. So initially it was with sports, because I'm a massive believer in physical exercise. We all know the benefits of physical exercise. And stem from there, I knew that I was good with children. And I resonated more with children than adults. And that tends to happen quite a bit. Actually, I prefer to probably be in a room full of children than adults. And it just grew from there.
Beautiful. And one thing that was very interesting to me is that you definitely had to overcome a fair bit of adversity. And I read a little bit about your just you growing up in a working class environments. Can you perhaps reflect on that and give us some of the lessons that taught you?
Yeah, so I'm from a council estate. There's a place here called Port Albert, Sandfields, very rough. They sell Father's Day packs in 3. That's Father's Day cards pack in 3. That's how rough it is. It is a very underprivileged area. And growing up, I was one of the only ones of my friends, I think, to go through the college, university system. Many of my friends didn't. Some went out to had apprenticeships and things like that, and some others didn't end up doing anything at all. So it was very difficult, especially for me. I went to a Welsh school. So I'm from Wales, went to a Welsh school in a very underprivileged area. So a Welsh school was in the middle of the mountains, middle of the valleys. And where I was more of a inner city kind of rough steelworks town. So it was a very funny upbringing that I had, because I had this farmers that spoke Welsh and were very, very Welsh, and this inner city council estate where things were a bit more difficult.
Yeah. When you're thinking about how that drive you to create opportunities for yourself and others, could you share a little bit more in depth about just the sheer lessons that you got from perhaps an underprivileged going up, basically, I suppose, position and situations?
Yeah, I think what still haunts me now is, and it's something I'm continuing to work on constantly, is the limiting beliefs. You know,
Hmm.
when you grow up and you hear people say things about money, and they say that money is the root of all evil, and all these kind of um, sayings that people have associated with money. That is something that I still find very difficult. But what I'm using is the ability to just think, it doesn't matter where you're from, what your background is. It's what you're planning for the future is the most important thing. There's no point looking back at the past. You need to be looking at the future.
Yes, absolutely. And for you, were there any moments, I call those aha moments, where you're in this tougher situations, you're growing up in this working class environments, where was there any situation where you said, you know what, hey, I need to do something with my life. I need to perhaps reflect on this to create a beautiful opportunity forward. Can you perhaps reflect on one of
Yeah,
those?
yeah, it was really funny because it was like this blanket of calm come over me. When I was in a very well paid job, a decent salary I was having, and I just thought, well, I've had enough of this. I completely disagree with the education system, especially here in the UK. It's broken Victorian style, and I had this sense of calm. I handed in my notice, and I always knew that I wanted to start my own business. Anyway, I had the idea that I would start the business by the time I was 40. So I develop all these skills in education and being a teacher, and then somehow use that skill set to create the company. But the time was just, well, I have to do it now. I wasn't happy. I was coming home angry, annoyed, frustrated with my wife, with my child at the time. And I thought, this has to change. And I have the mindset of, if I'm going to do something, I really go for it. So if I say I'm going to do this, like the books that we've done, I really go for the books, and I go all out until I either fail or succeed. I won't give up on something.
Yes. And it's interesting you talk about the education system. I promise you, it's not far better if it is in Canada and in much of the other places of the I suppose developed countries. It reminds me of a quote by Margaret Mead, which is children must be taught how to think, not what to think, which is a very important distinctions. When you're thinking about the importance of mindfulness in children's educations, how does that integrate with basically storytelling and educations and perhaps teaching them resilience? Tell me more about that relationship with for you.
Yeah, it's so important. So we developed the children's mindfulness stories that we have because we're in such a technology age now, and children are being exposed to so much technology, that the idea behind the books was to have that moment of being present, and for children to develop breathing techniques and mindfulness techniques. So we've got lots of different mindfulness techniques woven into the stories. So it's an introduction really to parents to have the opportunity for those children to be introduced to mindfulness without saying, this is mindfulness, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. So it's like blowing on the trees and things like that we've added. But it more than ever now, it is extremely important that children become present and mindful because of the lack, because of the need for them to be able to control their emotions. Really, with technology, what I was referring to is that they're having these dopamine hits, even though it's not a hit, dopamine increasing levels, and sometimes we need to stay away from that as much as we possibly can.
Very interesting. One thing that fascinated me when I was reading some of what you've been working on is a concept called cognitive behavior therapy, CBT for perhaps the acronym. Tell us more about that to start with.
Okay, so how I discovered it first of all, so being in that environment that I was in previously, in a school that I didn't want to be in, and I had the death of my stepfather, who's like a dad to me. So I was going through that grief process in a situation where I didn't want to be in with my occupation, and came across it somewhere. His name, the book that I read, is called The Chimp Paradox, and it's written by Professor Stephen Peters. So it summarizes it very simply. It can get more complex, but it's very simple in the sense that you have the computer, which stores all your memories. You have the chimp, who is your irrational behavior. And then
Hmm.
you have the human part, which is you, the logical thinking. So the idea behind his philosophy, his theory, is that that chimp part of your brain is stronger than the human part and acts irrationally without thinking of logic. So it acts through your emotions rather than acting through your personality, your values, and your beliefs.
Interesting, interesting, and what I'd love to explore is how you were able to leverage in quite a very short fashion, just 2 years to build basically an award-winning company. What was some of the of basically, I suppose, those strategies, those productivity strategy, most importantly, that you employed into and applicate into your company to make it so successful so early on?
So what I did is I blended cognitive brain therapy strategies with some of the amazing books that I've read. So Grant Cardone, 10X, you've got
Hmm.
Eat That Frog about productivity. So I tried applying them together to get the most out of them. So, for example, I'll give you one cognitive brain therapy trick that I use to get to the gym, which is the 30-minute trick I tell myself. So I'll say to myself, well, if I don't fancy going to the gym and I don't want to go to the gym, I'll just say to myself, I'm going to go for 30 minutes. But I know deep down that I'll probably be there longer than 30 minutes. It's just to calm that voice inside your head to know that you'll get there. And when you get there, then you'll end up probably being there longer as well. So it's the same with productivity. I'll make sure that I've got to do the hardest thing first, even though I hate it, because I know the hardest task that I need to do on that day will end up giving me the best results. It's the 80-20 principle, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I do the exact same thing, by the way, with running. I try to at least run 5 kilometers, which for our American friends is probably a little bit above 2 miles, if I'm not mistaken, every single day. And it's exactly the same thing. When you're getting you're just placing your shoes. You're like, oh no, there's 5 kilometers to run. It's such a big task. I have so many other things to do. But then you say, hey, we'll just go for a walk, right? We'll just go for a small jog, and just right what you are in that moment of actually doing it, you just crave more because obviously of how satisfying it is to do any sports or any, I suppose, physical activities. When you're thinking about some of the tricks that let's say an entrepreneur that never basically encounter any of these topics, they don't know what CBT is, they have never apply or read these books. What would you say is your best strategy to get into this world, to perhaps ingrain yourself with the necessary knowledge to optimize your performance?
I think the biggest factor for me has always been not to worry about what other people think about you. If you have that self doubt, if you have those limited beliefs, and you're thinking about what the person next door is going to say to you, your work colleague or whatever it's going to be, then you've got no chance of succeeding. You've got to try and remove those shackles and just be you, be yourself, and not worry. At the end of the day, and I say this as well, is that people have got their own worries, their own little world that they're in. I'm sure they're not going to focus too much on XYZ that you're doing.
Yes. And that's so powerful, isn't it? Because that story that you tell yourself in your head, not only is it is only your own, but if you make yourself your own prisoner in many cases, with that understanding that, well, maybe my what does my colleague basically will think of myself, or any friends or any outside basically sources you might expect, is something that can truly, I suppose, denigrate yourself, most importantly, but also it just inflige a pain in which you don't need to.
Yeah.
Truly, when you're thinking about storytelling, and that's, and even that little voice, it's a story in itself. When you're talking about storytelling as a tool for emotional resilience, can you perhaps examine some of your mindfulness based children's stories to perhaps main a story for our audience to be understanding of what emotional resilience even is?
Yeah, yeah. So one thing is catastrophizing. So what our brain will do, whether this you call it anxiety, fear, whatever kind of emotion that you feel, is we will catastrophize. So we will play this role in our head of this is going to happen. So say I was going to a meeting, I'm going to do a sales pitch, then we can catastrophize and think this is going to go wrong, etc. Like you were saying with your running, it's that part of your brain that wants to keep you nice and safe, wants to keep you nice and warm. So
Hmm.
it's trying to pull you in to do the safe thing rather than the thing that's going to cause you anxiety, fear. So it's just understanding. Let's take anxiety for an example. If I'm going into a situation where I know I'm going to be anxious, I tell myself beforehand, well, I know I'm going to be anxious to start off with. I understand where that emotion and feeling is coming from. So for me, it's obviously the kind of butterflies in your stomach, hands start to get a little bit sweaty, and sometimes your head might get a little bit warm. It's understanding those emotions, understanding those negative thoughts, allowing for those negative thoughts to happen and occur as well, instead of trying to block them out. I think that's the best way is allow them to happen, because then all of a sudden that message becomes a lot smaller, and fight those thoughts, those negative thoughts, with logic. Just say, well, that's probably not going to happen because you're catastrophizing. This is probably going to happen. Go back into your memory bank, think about positive situations that have occurred before, and just flood your mind with those. So something that I do in golf actually is try and blank out the negative thoughts of the previous shot when I was on that hole before. It's gone this way, gone that way, and try and think of just the positives. But it's really important that you do allow the negative thoughts to occur, because they are gonna occur anyway. You trying to squash them and push them down, I don't think is going to have a benefit to you.
Interesting. That reminds me of Stoicism a little bit. This idea in which we again, emotion will always play a part in the human experience. That's actually what makes us human in many ways. So let's definitely let them occur. But then this intentional, I wouldn't say suppression, but this intentional understanding that, well, yes, you have your emotions, but perhaps logic is something that is way more reliable, first and foremost, but most significantly something that can be duplicate over time. So pulling yourself in these states of trying to find similar situations. How did those goes? And if they went well, why not try to do it again and see perhaps if you can have a positive outcome once again. One story of yours that I've read was Let's Meet D. How do you pronounce his name, by the
Oh,
way?
Die, yeah, Die. It's a very
Die.
Welsh name. Yeah, yeah. Let me die.
Yeah,
I,
Let's Me
I,
Die, the dragon, right?
yeah.
And that story for me was really where I started to better understand some of your creativity towards emotional resilience. How do you write a book like this one? How does that emerge?
Okay, so we've got two books out currently. Let's Look Through the Window and Let's Meet Die the Dragon. So Die the Dragon's our mascot, and we decided how we're going to incorporate everything that's to do with Wales and Welshness in there as well. So we've added Welsh mythology, and a story about meeting Die for the first time, and as I was saying with the previous story as well, adding mindfulness strategies in. So the first one, Let's Look Through the Window, is a very simple book for, you can see it behind me actually. I know listeners can't hear me, but it's a very simple book which is just has a pair of curtains, and you will simply start by opening the curtains by doing different things on the page, and you will go through the seasons, and while you're going through you do things on the page for magic to happen. So you could tap on the bird table, blow on the trees, stroke the grass, just lots of different mindfulness strategies that will help children be a bit more present and distracted from the technology world.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this incorporation of tangible actions and intentionality towards mindfulness. Would you say that with an age in which we're evolving so quickly, everything is digitalized, do you think that mindfulness is hard as ever to acquire and to master?
Yes, I think it's extremely difficult to master. As we said, the technology age, the attention span, more than anything. You know, my attention span is awful. So I can't imagine a child's where they've been brought up with just instant gratification. I'll give you an example today. My son's tablet, which they are limited time on, it was updating, and he was like, "What's this?" He didn't know what was going on and couldn't wait for just that 1 2 minutes, because the attention span is just so low on children, because of that technology driven that world that we live in. You know, TikTok etc. now has two or even three videos that are being shown at the same time just to keep people's attention. It's worrying. It's really worrying.
What do we do about that? What do you think? What's next for perhaps our understanding that attention span is getting diminished? We understand that it's crucial for it to not be diminished. What's your position on what's next and how to improve this?
So I think you can't get rid of it. You can't ban it. You can't do things like that because that's not the world that we live in. We know that teenagers and children communicate through phones, communicate through gaming, etc. I think it's just been a bit more understanding of how it affects you and having strategies to be able to um, not use as much as you should. So one thing that I teach teenagers in one of the courses that we have is either switch off your phone half an hour before you go to bed, because your brain is still active half an hour after you go to bed if you're using it just before you go to sleep, or to use things like night mode, where it's a black and white screen, so the blue light is not emitting to try and increase your dopamine levels. So it's about educating, I think, more than anything. Educating, creating strategies, and trying to get children to understand that it can be positive, but there's a lot of negative things as well.
Yes, in a world where most families have both parents working, they have less time with their childrens, they have less time to perhaps teach some of those initiatives as well. Most of that job is done obviously through school, or at least that's the case in Canada. I'm expecting it to be very similar in Wales. Do you think it's also the a responsibilities of the schools and external institutions to actually be a bit more mindful and aware of how significant that problem is? And do you think that there's a potential, perhaps, world forward where school, for example, have some restriction on if they can have cell phone in class, or how much do you use basically electronics basically inside of the inside of the classroom? Do you think that's bound to happen with all the study that comes out to tell us that how awful and how big of a problem this is?
Yeah, I think so. Here, we have just had a few schools, a few high schools, secondary schools, ban phones. And I've been working with one school quite closely, and they said the results have been absolutely amazing. They've seen better academic success, they've seen better social interaction, and they've seen better behaviour as well. So a few schools have seen that kind of case study, and they are starting to do it themselves as well. What I think is every school, every class should have something like an initiative called mindfulness minutes, where one part of the day they just have calm, relaxed, being present, and switching off from their obviously emotions and possibly technology if they've been on it. So it could be after they've used technology or before they've used technology. So that's quite an interesting concept as well.
It is, and we know how powerful this can be, because one thing that is very problematic in basically the art of learning is you need some time to calm yourself down to actually acclimate your brain to new knowledge. If now we have something called habituations, where you basically don't have enough time so that your brain can not only perceive new information but obviously ingrain it permanently, or at least some portion of it permanently, in order to learn and in order to grow as human beings. This mindfulness minutes is actually very interesting. I never heard that's that solution. If you had to guess, would that be something that government can be bound in doing in next couple of years?
Yeah, I think so. So mindfulness minutes, we'd call it. Have you heard of the Daily Mile? There's a initiative that's global called the Daily Mile, where they simply take children and they try and get them to run a mile in a day, every single day, so getting outside. And I think there's thousands of schools that have signed up. So something similar, whereby the teacher has a bank of resources, whether that's videos, books, um, resources that can like scripts that she can read from, that would obviously, like a mindfulness story that would help calm the children. But I think we need to do something, don't we? Whether it's mindfulness minutes or whether it's a half an hour or 20 minutes, limiting the technology, because technology is amazing. Don't think I'm one of these people that's completely against technology, because I think it's absolutely amazing. But we need to counteract the damages of technology, I think, with something like that.
Sure, sure. So we heard your take on external institutions. Now, directly as part of the family settings, How much do you think the parents has a job to actually be being aware and perhaps either limit the screen time of their children's or find innovative way basically to have them go outside? How important is that to keep the family, I suppose, strong, but most importantly taking care of children that are, as we obviously all know, quite innocent and not fully aware of their actions?
Yeah, I think you said something earlier whereby you were talking about families who are extremely busy. And that's the kind of age that we live in now, whereby it's very difficult to juggle everything, isn't it? So I think the best way about going about this is just to try and develop healthy habits a little bit more. So taking one thing, for example, lunch times, dinner times together, and instead of having tablets where two people are cooking, two people having tablets, you as a family sit around together, the four of you, five of you, however many there are of you, and have a conversation that doesn't have technology anywhere near it, including phones. You know, if a phone is next to you, then more than likely you're going to break your concentration just by looking. So it could be phones out and have lunchtime, dinner time is just our family time. Little things like that could occur. Or like you were saying, then with the children a little bit older, okay, we're going out for a run once a week. We're doing this
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes, we're doing something else 20 minutes, using my 30-minute CBT trick. You know, right, we're going to do this for 30 minutes. Let's go, let's do it.
Yes, because something very alarming that I've been aware of, and I'm 20 years old, so I have a circle of obviously younger folk. They're not children anymore, but they're young adults, and I see many of them that have in an inability of actually communicating in real life. They're so basically astute when it comes to texting, when it comes to making sure they can obviously communicate in the digital format, but they completely blanked out at any tangible and real life conversations. To me, that's not only awful, but that tells me that this problem is extremely pressing. Have you ever come to that realization with even younger children as well?
Yeah, we have one thing we discussed. A friend of mine, like a work colleague as such, is social skills. So we were going to do a whole course, digital course or in-person course on developing those teenagers to have social skills, such as looking in someone's eyes when they're talking to you, not being distracted. You know, things that we would have just thought were for granted before, and
Yes.
now it seems to be a skill set that possibly we need to teach. It is
Yes.
worrying. You're right. It is really worrying.
No, it is. It is. And I see so many people struggling with this. And truly something that is not, that we definitely not ought to not take for granted is how that impact their confidence. They how that impact basically their acquiredness as well of basically in the real world, which, as we know, is so important for meaningful living, either professionally or personally. And talking about confidence, one thing that I hear, and at least I felt with the work that you're trying to do, is definitely try to empower children through boosting their confidence. Can you highlight perhaps some of the techniques you're using to doing such thing?
Yeah, so we've got a variety of things that we look at. So number one is obviously cognitive brain therapy for teenagers in particular to be able to understand their emotions, why they think things, and why they have so much anxiety and why anxiety is there, you know, and things you can do, strategies you can use to counteract it. But in schools, what we tend to do is make children perform as much as possible. So this can be singing, dancing, anything to do with physical exercise. But we will not make one child just perform on their own in front of everybody. So we do lots of little things where this is one trick that we do. So we'll have half the class performing and the other half watching. And the other half, then, once they're finished, will give positive feedback. So they will pick a pair or a person from that set they're performing and say something nice about them. And then we'll swap over. So when I first go into schools, we'll have children who are crying, you know, really not want to perform. This is of all ages. And then when I leave, by the time I leave, they all want to perform on their own. So it's just the more you do something, as you well know, isn't it? The easier it becomes. So I think more than ever now, we need to get children performing as much as possible, so they've got that confidence that will follow them through all the way until they become teenagers.
Yeah, I think it's Ellen Keller, if I'm not mistaken, said that optimism is the fate that leads to achievement, right? Without this understanding that I think of myself as somebody that can achieve some things, the likelihood of you doing such thing is very minimal, if not zero. When you're thinking about the downfall of life and how obviously complex it is to grow as human beings, the evolution from obviously a fetus all the way to adulthood that occur in such a small timeline. So let's be very honest, about 18 years, 19 years if you count the time in the womb. How can we perhaps insert a society of optimism, of society of empowering children's instead of bringing them down through comparison, through which we see very often in social media, through this pressure as well that they felt of actually becoming great at a very young age, which caused depressions, suicide in the worst case, which obviously we is very impactful, especially in Quebec and Canada. We see it a lot in younger and younger children's. How do we install, do you think, a culture in which can empower them with optimism?
A statistic I want to go over with you is that 50% of people who suffer mental health issues will have developed a mental health issue by the time they are 14 years old, and then 75% by the time they are 24. So there's a really nice Desmond Tutu quote, which is, we need to stop pulling people out of the river and go back upstream and find out why they've fallen in. So it's
Mm,
a very complex question, which you've asked me. And I think we could spend a long time on it.
right.
I think it's strategies, giving teenagers, giving students strategies to be able to deal with issues when they arise. So it's a prevent strategy rather than a cure strategy. Because some people have said to me, well, you need to change the education system, X, Y, Z. But the thing is, we are not going to change the education system. We're not going to change the technology age that we're living in. There's a lot of things that are not in our control. I'd love to be able to say, yeah, we can change this, we can change that, but it's not going to happen. So instead, it's, well, this is life, unfortunately. This is the way it's going to be. Let's develop strategies to be able to deal with X, Y, Z. And what we do as well, in our course, is we help teenagers develop strategies to be able to support each other. So it's more of a peer to peer rather than
Mm.
seeking adult help all the time. Because the feedback we had from teenagers is that they wanted to be able to support themselves, be signposted if needed, but more importantly, be able to help each other.
Yes. That's a very interesting point. When you're thinking of that role as a mentor, a mentee, and how the overlaps to be basically I don't recall the author of this quote. Pardon me, but it says something along the lines of when you're teaching, you're learning, and when you're learning, you're teaching. Right? They're so embedded with one another. When you're thinking about that relationships of peer to peer feedback and peer to peer empowerment, how soon can we see that in children? And is there an age that is required for them to actually be great source of empowerment? Or tell me more about that relationship.
I think what's extremely difficult is to teach empathy and sympathy. Um, I believe if we equip children with strategies, not
Hmm.
only for themselves but for others, then what we do is we look at red flags and signs and symptoms.
Hmm.
So if one of their friends or a family member is going through something, there's a possibility that they can see, oh, actually, this is occurring. They've got a change in behavior. They're not eating as much. They're not socializing as much. So it's more about equipping them to be able to understand that something's not quite right. So we have aimed it at 14 years old because I think just going into high school, I think that's roughly the right age. But I don't think there's a right answer for that either.
Yeah. 14 sounds quite white. I'm kind of like getting flashback from my life as well. And before 14, you truly don't know much, let's be very honest, nor about the world or yourself. Not that at 14 you have such a grandiose understanding, but I think you definitely can start to make some logical links and actually empowering basically your environments through your own insights and your own understanding of the world. One thing that I want to talk about significantly on this show is MHFA, which you've been basically pioneering mental health first aids, and that seems to be for teenager, and I think this program is so interesting in the ways in which it kind of equips teens with tools to support themselves mental health wise. Can you dive a little bit more deeper into how that occur and what's your mission with that?
Yeah, so I did the mental health first aid course training for adults,
Mm-hmm.
and I've linked it with cognitive brain therapy as well. So we've really adapted it to suit my story and the company story a bit more, and to suit it more towards teenagers, understanding how important physical exercise is, etc., as I spoke about earlier. So I looked at how much the course was. I think it's about £130. So we're $150, something like that, I think. And I thought there's absolutely no way teenagers can afford this. So they'll be priced out. So we thought, well, how can we simplify this? Put it into smaller bits of information that students can use over a smaller time frame. So we have two courses that'll be going out, one towards schools and one for the general public. So the schools one is peer-to-peer, developing strategies to be able to support each other in school. And then the public one is called Stronger Minds in 30 Days, a teen's blueprint for mental resilience. So we look at what a teenager has to deal with, how to manage stress, how to manage anxiety, the importance of physical exercise, the importance of using social media in a positive way. So to answer your question, we've taken the good bits out of the mental health first aid for adults and applied it to teenagers, and then added our bits in from the feedback that we've had from teenagers of their daily struggles that they have to live with.
Yes, and that's so honorable. The work you did there, and the understanding that again, cost is definitely something to keep in mind, especially when you're targeting a younger demographic, where obviously their buying power are getting suppressed actually every single day. It seems like, which is another big conversation to be worried about. But when you're thinking about you were just mentioning social media. I think it's such a key part of mental health. When you're thinking about just the negative impacts of screen time and social media on teenagers, perhaps this problem of comparing themselves with others as well. Is there any meaningful strategies to mitigate these effects?
Yeah, that's a real big one. Comparing yourself to other people. It happened to me recently as well. After I went revisited through the train, I thought to myself, actually, yeah, I'm following this account of this lady who is amazing, is miles ahead of where I am. And every time I was watching it, I was feeling sad rather than happy. It's amazing the content and things that she has, but I was sort of envious and jealous of the where she was at in her career and the things that she accomplished. So I decided to unfollow her, because if we constantly comparing ourselves to other people, then our cortisol levels are going to increase, and that's exactly not what we don't want. So if teenagers are following all of these influencers, content creators who have got Lamborghinis, etc., and they here, there, and everywhere, then that's going to have the complete opposite effect on them that they require.
Yes, and cortisol, and I was an athlete, so I heard about, and I was a nutrition as well, so I heard a lot about cortisol and how that affects your everything, your sleep, your eating habits, your mood, and so on. I heard this great study, and I actually read the thesis. I don't recall. I think it's Harvard Business School, but I may be wrong. It's a very interesting study that basically took 10,000 basically children's teenagers, not children, teenagers in the United States, and compare their stress level and cortisol level compared to warriors and basically fighters in World War II. And you would be absolutely shocked. And we'll
I
link
think
to
I
this
heard
study.
this. Yeah, I think I
Yeah,
heard something like this before.
and
Yeah.
we'll link to this for our audience if you'd like to dive deeper into it. But it is mind-boggling in many ways. A typical 14-year-old these days as a higher cortisol level than people literally combating in World War II, which is just, I mean, it cannot be more shocking than this. When you're thinking about, again, just how stressful this world is, and it's more mental stress than physical stress in many ways. I don't know if you would agree with me on
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
The I think that mitigating these effects are so important, but then improving on basically the fact of our understanding of what cortisol is and educating perhaps is I think very much as important as awareness. When you're thinking about all these things unfolding, and in some of your project, obviously to empower children's all the way to now teenagers and young adults, like you were talking to me about, is there any core strategies that you saw that can be applied in such ways in which pretty much anybody can derive positive results from?
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's physical exercise. It is so extremely important when you see the dopamine levels, the serotonin levels, the cortisol levels from exercise. It's crucial. We know that it does amazing things for you, but for your brain, it's the most important thing of all. And what the issue we have is that teenagers now are going outside, and children are having less time outside than they should be. So here we have the minimum amount is supposed to be 2 hours a week of physical exercise, and I know for a fact the schools here are definitely not meeting those standards because of the need for academic success.
Yeah, my mother used to always say me a healthy mind and a healthy body. And those are so important because they're so interconnected. When you're thinking about basically the role of physical education and in physical, I suppose, practice also in mental and emotional health, dive deeper into that connection of yours. You just mentioned some of you definitely understand know that the school are not respecting that 2 hour of week of physical educations. Dive deeper into that connection and just how crucial it is for mental and just physical stability.
So, number one, we were talking about mindfulness earlier. So, getting outside, doing exercise is escapism. It's that opportunity to try and forget about what's going on. So, if I'm in the gym and I'm lifting heavy weights, I'm not going to be thinking about something else. I'm going to be worried that I can't lift those heavy weights. So that's crucial. It's just being mindful and being out of a situation that you want to be able to help distract yourself. And number two is, like we were saying, the cortisol levels. So if you're not exercising, your cortisol level is going to stay consistently high. And if you are exercising, then the cortisol levels are going to slowly come down. Your serotonin levels are going to increase. So if you're not exercising, eating well, then those cortisol levels are going to stay the same. You're going to be in a low mood, guaranteed, because what that cortisol is doing is not allowing you to be happy and not allowing you to have nice, positive thoughts. So you're just counteracting it by increasing your serotonin levels.
Interesting. Interesting. Because to me, and obviously as an avid athlete and somebody that obviously trains brain as well as a whole in an holistic fashion, it's so important because and there's always it's always about I think knowing yourself. For example, I'm very much of a morning person. So personally, I'd love to first thing in the morning just go for a run or go to basically the gym, hit some weights. That just truly, and it always fascinates me about how good I feel after a workout. This kind of like cold, satisfying, basically sensation of well-being. Do you, when you're thinking about how the different perhaps I wouldn't say personality type, but all the different preference when it comes to morning exercise or nightly exercise, and then the schedule also that need to be taken into consideration because again we live in such a performance-based world. To you, have you ever seen a better way to exercise, or the bottom line is just to do it?
Just to do it. I think more importantly than anything, like you were saying, is you've developed that daily habit of being able to go out in the morning. So once you've done it a few times, all of a sudden then it becomes a habit. So whether you do it, whether it's at night or whether it's at daytime, the important thing is, like you said, is just do it. Start. Get going to start off with, and it will slowly become a habit. And because, like you were saying, you'll feel so good afterwards, it'll be something that you'll kind of chase and want to do every day because you know how good it is for you and you know how good you're going to feel.
Yeah, day one day or day one. I think that was the Rock Johnson, and
Oh, yeah.
he's so right. He's so right because that's exactly right. The hardest journey of the other's day, basically of building any habits, is day one. It's so complex. Your basically your little voice don't want you to do it because we never know what can happen. There's some risk that maybe basically it's stepping out of your comfort zone, which I think that's another thing that I'd like to talk to you about when you're thinking about stepping out of your comfort zone. We see this very often with top performer, and every single high performer of any basically disciplines understand how important that is that something we should always teach our children's, and if so, how can we do it in an effective manner?
So it's going back to the cognitive brain therapy strategy and understanding that you are going to feel these emotions where you do not want to do that thing, and it is going to feel horrible, and it's catastrophizing again. So your brain is going to be saying all things to try and keep you safe, to try and keep you warm and keep you out of danger. So it's speaking to the children and yourself. Self talk is extremely important, and saying that I am doing this because XYZ. This needs to be done because XYZ. If it has to be done, if it is going to improve your future somehow, if it's going to make you feel better, if it's going to make you feel happier, then it is worth overcoming those negative thoughts to do whatever it is that needs to be done. So it's extremely important to talk to children. It's okay to feel these horrible feelings you're feeling, and to understand that it is worth it. And the same with self-talk. It's okay to feel like it's a really big step that you're going to take, but once you've took that step, it's not going to be nowhere near as bad as you originally thought it was. Because again, we're going back to that catastrophizing.
Yes, it reminds me of something I always love, which was it's okay to not feel okay, but it's not okay to give up. And I
Mm.
read this super obviously powerful book, which I'm sure you know about. It's Atomic Habits
Yeah.
by Mr. Clear, just one of my all time favorite, no doubt. And he was talking about that. That's very very specific elements of how hard it is to build an habit, but then once you have it, it's just as hard to lose it. So a little bit like you have obviously muscle memory, you also have habits memories in many ways. So it's just about starting and trying to make the most of it. Now, one thing I want to talk to you about a lot in mental health is we've been seeing a lot of studies showcasing how important breakfast, basically having something in your belly to go to school or to practice any basically any successful endeavors. And you've been growing up in adversity. I know a lot of people that have been that grow up in perhaps tougher childhood as well, and many of those don't have anything to eat. Unfortunately, they go to school, they have nothing to eat. They don't have any money either to basically buy something at the cafeteria. How can we level the playing field so that we can understand that obviously they're worth it of education and mindfulness and mental health, but how can we do so in a perhaps in a more holistic way?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, isn't it? Because we've got many children here in the UK in poverty who are not starting the day right. Because how are you going to concentrate if your belly's rumbling and if you're so hungry?
Hmm.
We have a footballer here called Rashford, plays for Manchester United, the England soccer player.
Uh-huh.
He has had a massive campaign to make all school meals free. So he's been successful in his campaign. So before you'd have a selection of people who were on free school meals as such. Now he's made it. I think he's successful. It's definitely in Wales here successful, whereby all children will have access to food of some kind, which is again extremely important. We here as well also have breakfast clubs. So parents can go and drop their children off to breakfast club to ensure they will have something before starting school.
Yes, and you're definitely in advance then than Canada. I have never heard any of this in Canada, any free meal whatsoever. I may be wrong, by the way. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's definitely not across Canada. I'm 100% sure of that. And we've been seeing a lot of these initiatives, and we have mostly a North American audience, but I study and I'm very keen on European rules and legislations and all sorts of innovation towards a more, I suppose, equal and equitable, I suppose, world. One thing that always shocked me is the province I live in, Quebec, and our basically prime minister is Mr. François Legault, and he just basically passed the legislations that there will be no longer phone in the
Oh,
classroom.
good.
It's been
Yeah.
rolled out, but it's been rolled out 8 years after France, for example, which are people that we should at least try to copy the good move they're making. So we've been seeing that the adaptation curve in America has been a little bit more on the slower sides, the more laggard perhaps perspective, which is very interesting because we always pride ourselves on innovation and this understanding that we're pioneering all these things. Now you're telling me about free meals. And I know Rashford very well, obviously quite prolific striker of Manchester United. And I heard his story, but I didn't know it was this effective. So that's so beautiful. And how Rashford is just one of the many famous and affluent and influential people that try to better the world, and also focusing on children. It's so important. How important is that as a society to have the people that actually made it come back to a point where they can give back to the communities and give back either knowledge or resources wise?
Yeah, I think it's so important, mainly because of the reach and the voice that they have. If I wanted to start a campaign, then it would take me a long time to get where he is. He has the power. He has the Instagram followers. He has the social media followers, and he has the ability to capture that audience, doesn't he? But yeah, it's extremely important that people like him are passionate, because without him, then I don't think any of this would have happened.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and for example, we have Montreal Canadian as a foundation that basically give back to children's in diverse needs, cancer, and all sorts of disease. And it's so important that to empower from the top, because, like you said, they have the power, they have the influence, and when they speak out, everybody listen, and
Yeah.
that's so important when you're thinking about so basically strategies for improving mental health in schools. I would love if you can discuss kind of like if your approach the we've been talking about some of the things you've been doing and how effective they can be, but is that doable to embed basically a mental health support system in educational institution?
No, it's extremely difficult. Something I've been a part of. So we have the NHS here, the National Health Service.
Hmm.
I was involved with a campaign called the Whole School Approach. So that looked at um, evaluating yourself as a school of all the different things, like a self-assessment of all the different things you're doing in your school, and then create an action plan on how to improve it. And I think a number of schools signed up, but something like that would be excellent for all schools across the world, because you could really have a deep dive into, right, what are you doing for the mental health of parents? What are you doing for the mental health of teachers, which is extremely important, because, if teachers are not happy, then you're not going to have happy students. It's things like that. I think that people need to take a closer look at themselves and think, well, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And what are we going to do to fix it?
Wow, that's a very interesting angle. If the teachers are not happy, the children won't be happy either. When you're thinking about, we have a teacher crisis across the world, and specifically in the province of Quebec, less and less people wants to be teachers for all sorts of reasons, economics, but also just how tough that job is. To me, being a teacher is one of the most novel and something that should be honorable profession of any kind. I think it's a part with doctors and lawyers and all sorts of other jobs that are so required, policemen and firefighters and so on. Why do you think that is? You were a teacher, obviously, for many years. You decided to step away from it. What do you think it is that teachers, I suppose, make them unhappy? Or just tell me more about the depth of the problem.
So why are they leaving the profession, and why does nobody want to be a teacher? Um, an education system that people don't believe in, I think, is the first one. Someone said, I can't remember who it was, if the hardest thing to change was it Elon Musk. He said the hardest thing to change is the education system of a country, and he's 100% right, because we are still using Victorian methods. Like, we know now children shouldn't be sat down for long periods of time, but then we've still got schools that are making them sit down with their legs crossed, their arms folded. We've got schools that are very evidence based. So, if you're marking, you've got to mark a child's work, and you've got to put green highlighter and pink highlighter, and the child's not even going to see the book. And then the books are being scrutinized by somebody who's never been in education, telling you how to teach and how to do these things. So the whole system is just completely and utterly broken. And then you've got parents who have no respect for teachers like they used to before, children
Mm.
who've got very low attention spans because of the technology age that we live in as well, and behavior issues because the parents, for a variety of reasons, I don't know what the answer is. It could be that they're more in work. It could be that they haven't got the parenting skills that people had previously before. It could be they have more worries because of the financial issues that we have, obviously in COVID and everything that happens. So you mix all this up in a boiling pot, and it doesn't sound like a system that you'd like to get involved with at all, does it?
One thing that always surprised me as a very young adult in this world is truly parents' disrespect for teachers who played such a humongous role in raising their children's. You're far obviously older than myself. You're still quite young, but obviously in
Yeah,
comparison,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
far older. And the Was that always the case when you're in wall, for example? Was that always the case? Is the problem getting worse? Why do you think that problem is even happening? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's a tricky question again, isn't it? Because I definitely think it's getting worse from speaking to educators. It's definitely
Okay.
getting worse. The respect is not there as much as before. I think parents feel entitled. I think we're going down that route where they think, well, I can dictate because you're getting paid from my taxes, etc. I can dictate how I want my child treated. And what's really hard for teachers is that we've been through university, we've done our teachers training, we've got this massive bank of knowledge, but still you have parents who come in and think they can tell you how to kind of teach their child. So again, a variety of different factors, but I think it all boils down to respect. So it could have been when they were in school, they had a difficult time with a couple of teachers, and then they are just passing that on to their child, then that kind of message. And people's values and beliefs are very different as well. If your value and belief is that you don't need to go to school and you're not going to go to university anyway, if you're passing that on to your child, then we've got no hope.
Yes, to me, again, it's fascinating because I've seen in many cases adversity and in kind of like a sense of confrontations from the parents to basically to the teacher side, which is again so interesting because would it be just much more beautiful and much more Korean and logical to actually play as a team here? Look, we have a child to raise. You're gonna have it basically for it depends on where you are in the world, but 8 to 10 hours basically a day, 6 to 10 hours a day perhaps for basically in school, learning through that teacher in one way or another. That teamwork I think is not enough reinforced where we see this confrontation basically mindset of like you said, well, the education system is funded by the public funds. I pay taxes, so I have a say basically in all these decisions, which I agree. But let's play as a team here. Let's embrace what's most important, which is just how good the education is for the child. Would you agree with that? Isn't that
Yeah.
just
No, I
evident?
completely agree with you. It's building positive relationships. So something I used to do when I was teaching was on a Friday, once the school week is finished, I would call up three or four parents and just say something that child did really well. So whether it's a child that usually has behavior issues or whether it's just a normal child. So if you're constantly giving positive praise to the parent, when you need to speak to the parent about something negative, then it's not that you're having negative conversations constantly. They'll remember the nice positive thing that you've said to them, and you can build a relationship that way. Because if a child is misbehaving, most of the time it's going to be negative conversation after negative conversation, and then that parent is going to feel awful because that's the only relationship you're having is negative conversations all the time.
Yes, and that's so crucial. That's so crucial, and I think that again we ought as a society and as a world understand how crucial that relationship between parents, educators, anyone having any sorts of influence on your child truly is, and make that once of positive empowerment and not negative integration. I think is definitely the way I see it. Um, Nicholas, when you're thinking about how effectively basically we can build a future of resilience and well-being in schools. We talk about a couple of your strategies, a couple of what you think is possible, but I truly like to own in on your vision of the future, where perhaps mental health awareness and resilience buildings it's a core component of educations. How far are we of that, and perhaps please expand your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, here in the UK, I think we're miles off. We need a radical change. I think more than anything to develop resilience is we need to allow children to fail. We need to actually set them up to fail. Because as we know, being entrepreneurs, you learn more from your failures than you do from your success. So if we are saying to children, right, your book has to look perfect and you have to do this and you have to do that, well, it's a completely wrong message that we send in children. So fail first more than anything. Get
Hmm.
answers wrong. No child should have 20 correct ticks in their book after 20 because then they're not really succeeding. That's just something that they're obviously able to do. If you want them to problem solve and develop resilience, then you want them to get some of those questions wrong and make them extremely difficult so that they're used to failure.
Wow. That's an uncommon answer. All right, I love it. I love it. My first mentor used to say, "Sam, I want you to fail and fail fast." Which is,
Yeah.
and the first time that I hear it was like, "What do you mean? Don't you want to just set me up for success?" And that's the goal. He said, "Yes, but you need to understand that the path for success is basically accommodating of many failures along the way. It's this idea in which failure and success are two different paths is completely foolish. They're the same path, and you need to go through those failures to achieve success." I think what you said there is so interesting. Setting them up for failure so they can understand what it means and perhaps better learn how to succeed afterwards. Where does that change need to start with? When you're thinking about, you said we're miles away. Does that start with the government? Does that start? Tell me more about where do you think that first increment of positive change may occur?
Yeah, I think it starts with the government and somebody being brave enough, whether it's a council, whether it's a small number of schools, to say this is the way that we are going to do things. Have a case study and have all the data and statistics to go with the findings that they have, and then hopefully being able to slowly trickle that down to other schools, because we know a lot of the leaders, they are, I call them blue way thinking, and thrive on statistics and data. So I think we need to collect that statistics data and prove that that concept works first before anything else, which we know it does work, but yeah, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. Well, Mr. Nicholas Clement, it was such an absolute pleasure to hear your perspective and just to see some visionaries and people like yourself that truly want to innovate towards such a noble cause of empowering our youth to do better and therefore perhaps become a better person and better the world through it. To me, I can summarize this whole podcast with a singular quote from Nelson Mandela, which is education the most powerful tool which you can use to change the world. Would you like to perhaps communicate and share some of your last thought with our audience, please?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the thought, the quote that I said earlier, which was the Desmond Tutu one. That's something that we've really built our message on, which is strategies, not excuses. So yes, you might have mental health issues. Yes, there might be problems, but you have to deal with them. That's just the way it is. You have to develop strategies to deal with them. You're not going to be left alone, but you need strategies to be able to deal with them. So that's what.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.